Good morning, afternoon, or evening, folks, and welcome to Cast of All Trades, the show where we talk about developing skills, exploring ideas, and following curiosity. I'm your host, Orion Siebert, and in this episode, I'm joined by Kevin Burk. Kevin has been studying and teaching philosophy through astrology for the past 30 years. What does it mean to be happy? Why do stories matter when it comes to happiness? And what is the human game? Learn about the basics of astrology, what people get wrong about it, how we can change our lives through stories, and much more. I had a wonderful time talking with Kevin this week, and while there are a number of things that we may disagree on, especially when it comes to astrology, there were also a lot of things that we came together with and agreed about. This was a good exercise for me in particular to expose myself to new ideas and different ways of thinking that I'm just not accustomed to. I found it particularly interesting how many ideas I found from other sources, from business, philosophy, from just other areas of my life, that Kevin had also converged on. And if you listen to many other episodes of this podcast, then you'll likely catch on to some of those connections as well. First, we talk about astrology and then Kevin's background in it. Then we dive more into the human game and Kevin's framework to happiness through storytelling. If you enjoy expert interviews like what you're about to hear in this episode, then be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on other interviews I have coming up. As I'm recording this, I have prepared a string of other interviews with authors, inventors, entrepreneurs, and much more. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out. And I believe that about covers it. So, without further ado, Kevin Burk. Kevin, welcome to the show. It's nice to have you on today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, before we really dive into it, I would love to hear your story. What's it that you do and how did you start?
Well, you thought that was a simple question. I misidentified as an astrologer for like 30 years.
Okay.
I really thought I was an astrologer. My pronouns were Scorpio, Cancer, Gemini. This is what I did. This is what I was doing. And I never really fit in with the astrological community. And that I never really fit in anywhere. So that really didn't raise any big existential questions for me.
Kind of get that.
But I was applying critical thinking to astrology. I was always trying to get it to do. Astrology always made these great big promises to me as to what it could do, the answers it could give. And it never quite lived up to those. And I spent pretty much close to 30 years trying to
fit a square peg into a round hole.
Yeah, well, it just basically trying to beat it into submission. It's like, tell me the answer. This needs to pass some basic critical thinking. And over the course of that, I've been teaching astrology since, for I guess about 24 years. I started teaching in 2000. And over that time, I've created so many different courses and so many different approaches trying to figure out how to teach astrology. Because one of the things is that there are people that have studied astrology for 30 years and they can't interpret a natal chart. Nothing takes 30 years to learn. So there is something fundamentally missing in the framework, in the approach, something not about astrology itself, but about how it was being taught. And so I started approaching it like, well, let's treat it like a language. Let's actually treat it like a language. Let's understand the grammar and the syntax of this. Let's, instead of just studying vocabulary words, which is kind of how most people were learning astrology.
It's treating it like learning your first language, where you go into it, make mistakes, kind of get surrounded by it, versus trying to learn a language in a school where they say, here's your vocab to learn for the week. Then you'll learn it good enough for the test and proceed to forget it afterwards.
But you're literally, when you were studying the vocabulary words, I mean, it's like learning from a phrase book.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like you couldn't have a conversation. You couldn't easily put together your own original thoughts. You were relying on the prepackaged phrases because you weren't learning an underlying structure of that. And so I spent a couple of decades really going down that particular path. And I launched a number of different programs and had all these cutting edge ideas and was doing a lot of, just really was doing some innovative stuff. And periodically, really discovering just a deep kinship with the captain of the Titanic, because I'd be in the middle of teaching a program and I would realize, oh yeah, this doesn't actually do what I thought it did.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh yeah, that's definitely an iceberg. Yeah, we're gonna hit that. We're gonna finish this course, and I'm just gonna try to get everybody out of here alive. But it is just not. It is not going to deliver on what I thought it was going to do, because now that I have taken it further, now I see this train does not go where I think it goes. And I went through that many times, and it never stopped being frustrating. But then I'd always come up with a whole new, what about this? And I'd have a brand new approach that would find another couple of pieces of the puzzle, but it still wasn't connecting.
So slowly building up course after course, sort of cobbling together from mistakes learned, lessons learned.
Lessons learned, entirely new metaphors, entirely new ways of, and that became important to understand what I was doing after the fact. But I was coming up with these stories to describe, okay, how are we approaching this? And one of the things that I realized was that the popular approach to astrology, what people think of as astrology today, is very much a system of personality typing. It's very much about describing the personality. And there's a lot of benefit to personality typing, but personality typing is really about making sense of other people. It's really about being able to sort other people into boxes so that you can understand, basically answering the universal question, what the hell is wrong with you? It's a big, that question sort of at the root of psychology and sociology. And I mean, it's a big
that's
question.
fair. And thinking about now, this is just me quickly bro sciencing for a second, but that seems like actually that makes a lot more sense to me now, because I'm someone who knows next to nothing about astrology. I've learned I spent maybe 10 minutes on YouTube videos before we hopped in this interview, just trying to cobble something together of what is this? Because I've tried to learn bits and pieces throughout the years and have never been able to understand why do people believe this? What is there to this? And you describing as people trying to find personality stuff, I connect that to something like Myers-Briggs personality types or Big Five. And I've looked at a couple different research papers comparing that to astrology. Okay, I can see where these overlap. It's kind of similar.
They overlap because they're all essentially being, astrology is not a system of personality typing, but it can be used in that way. And we think because this is how astrology is being used, that's what it is. And so the limits and the frustrations that I've experienced with astrology are not limits of astrology, they're limits of personality typing. Personality typing is incredibly useful to help you, because other people are scary. We need to be able to understand why other people behave the way they behave. And personality typing is a great way of doing that, because in your mind, you get to put somebody, oh, they're in that box.
Mm-hmm.
I'm over here, they're in that box. I understand now why they're doing what they're doing. So they're no longer a problem.
Mm-hmm.
May still be an obstacle, but they're not a problem anymore because I understand they fit in my understanding of reality. They're no longer an existential threat.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to pause
So
you there
that's,
for a second.
yeah.
So, before we dive more into the idea of obstacles versus problems, I think you said something very critical there that a lot of people don't realize,
Mm-hmm.
that there's a interesting psychological principle, or I guess sociological, if you want to look at how humans interact with one another, where there's a reason stereotypes exist. It's so we can fit people into boxes and say, I can quickly shortcut my way to, you have these few traits, that means you're
Yes.
probably this kind of person. It's lessening the mental load that we have to be able to process and understand other people, to say, you're a safe person, you're a dangerous person.
And it is absolutely, it is part of the factory installed algorithm about safety.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be able to, are you a threat? We're doing pattern matching, going, this is that. Other people are dangerous, unpredictable. And so being able to sort other people into boxes
Mm-hmm.
makes it possible for us to think, okay, I've got a handle on reality. Really useful thing. The limit of that, where things get, and that's the value of personality typing. It is wonderful for you to sort somebody else into a box so you can feel like you understand what they're doing.
Mm-hmm.
It does not work so well when you then try to get that other person to agree that they actually belong in that box and should just get back to the box that you think that that does not work. That creates more problems.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this is part of the frustration with astrology. It's like, okay, it's great. And it's a great system of personality typing because, with everything else, with Myers-Briggs, with Big Five, you have to take a test. You have to fill out a questionnaire to determine what boxes you belong in. And with astrology, your boxes are all based on the date, time, and location of your birth. So it makes it a lot harder to cheat. And it's a much more refined and specific, so a lot of value to it. But part of what I realized was I'm not interested in personality typing. I'm not interested in describing personality. I hadn't quite realized that. So I'm realizing, oh, we're painting an astrological portrait. When you're interpreting a natal chart, you're painting a portrait. That was the latest metaphor that I came up with.
So I'm assuming a natal chart is just from my quick astrology YouTube deep dive, I think that's a map of what stars, planets, how everything's aligned, like the day and time of your birth. Is that
literally,
right?
it is a map of the positions of the planets as seen from the location of where you were born.
Okay.
So it's very, it is literally a snapshot of how everything looked from your position on Earth.
Gotcha.
At that time. And having that interpreted is like having your portrait painted if you're doing it from a person. And that's what my mom's a portrait artist. Having a portrait painted is a great experience. It's lovely to sit there for 60, 90 minutes, have someone tell you how pretty you are. And you may learn something about yourself, seeing yourself reflected. You see a likeness in the portrait. It's not you, but it's a reflection. And that's great. And then when it's done, you have a portrait. You hang it up on a wall. You look at it from time to time. You can't do anything with it. It's just there.
Mm-hmm.
And I was always looking for, how do we make this dynamic? I could see the potential of this. This is something that should be living and breathing.
Looking for the utility in the art.
But there's value in the art of it. But I was looking for, it's like, okay, but I can't use this. These are interesting, broad, descriptive ideas. They do help me to sort of understand a little bit of the framework writ large of maybe who I am, but it doesn't help me decide how do I make this decision that's sitting in front of me right now. It's not something that was practical in any kind of a dynamic way. And so I was 3 years ago was in the middle of sort of an advanced training program and had another Titanic experience, and I realized, this doesn't do what I thought it was going to do. But then I also started to have these glimmers of really incredibly dynamic bits of astrology. And ironically, because this class that I was teaching, this program I was teaching was supposed to be about synthesis, because I still had this idea that somehow you take all of these teeny tiny little pieces and then you figure out how they all fit together, and then you tie it up in a bow and you get like the answer. And that's just not at all how it works. And what I discovered is you can't, bundling things together isn't the point. The point is break it down as small as possible, and then take the teeny tiny little piece. It just that you can't, little astrology goes such a long way. And so I started exploring just, okay, so everybody thinks astrology is all about the signs, which that's a modern astrology thing. It's about the planets, the signs. The signs are like adjectives and adverbs. The planets are the nouns and the verbs. You don't have a sentence without a planet. A sign is not a sentence. And the signs themselves are made up of a combination of one of 4 elements and one of 3 modalities. And you don't get anything by combining the element and the modality. They actually, the element and modality answer 2 completely different questions. And if you try to merge them together, you don't get, the whole is less than the sum of its parts. And I started to realize, okay, well, the modality tells you how you approach a goal. And I started discovering, oh, that's actually practical. That's actually dynamic. I mean, I gotta tell you, in 20 plus years of counseling as an astrologer, grand total, I don't know that I spent more than 2 hours talking about the modality. It was just, and now it's like, oh my God, no, you got 2 hours. We can talk about just the modality of one thing in your chart, because it's going to be like the most mind-blowing thing, because it's useful.
Why do you think that is?
Let me give you, because it's a strategy. So for example, the big discovery that I had was recognizing that I take a cardinal approach to money, because my second house, which is the house that relates to finances and things, that is governed by a planet that is in a cardinal sign. So I'm on team hair for this. There's the modality teams that I made up. Cardinal is team hare, fixed is team tortoise, mutable is team hummingbird. 3 completely different ways that you're going to approach the goal. So cardinal treats the goal as an archery target. You've got to hit the target with 1 arrow. Everything goes into the preparation. You put everything into the preparation, into the aim, but once you let go of the arrow, nothing more you can do. You either hit the target or you don't. If you hit the target, take a giant leap forward. If you miss the target, you have made no progress. You have wasted some resources, and you start over again. And maybe it's like, oh, well, let me make an adjustment to that. And realizing that is how I have always approached everything relating to money. I don't want to have to deal with money. So basically just give me a giant amount of money that if I could just get that target and that amount of money, then I would not have to think about money for a very long time. And so I'm looking for, what project can I do? So I'll have all of these financial goals about a particular class, and I'll put all of this energy into launching a program, and then I immediately lose interest because I can't do anything about it. I mean, I loved doing the program. I'll follow the program, but clearly it didn't hit the target. I'm not going to, never reach the financial goal. And so I'm immediately off looking for something else. And it's like, okay, that's it. And realizing this is how I'm always going to approach money goals. It's always going to be a target, always a single. So how do I address? Well, one thing to realize with something like that, since I'm always going to skip steps and leapfrog over things, I can't change that, but nowhere is it written that the target has to be all the way at the top of the stairs. I can move the target closer. If I break the goal up, if I break this into smaller incremental goals, I'm still hitting the target, but I can hit the target more easily because I've moved the target closer. Smaller goal, hit the target, get a sense of accomplishment, then the next target. And it's like, oh yeah, this is because like every single time, and there are other qualities specifically associated with that strategy. It's like, oh my God, this is useful, like on a daily basis to recognize, oh yeah, taking a cardinal approach to that again. Yeah, trying to fix the past. Yeah, well, no, let's address that. And jumped the gun on this. Maybe I should go back and read the instructions, because I'm already making attempts, and just recognizing that pattern and being able to see that in specific things. But then there are other things that I take a fixed approach to. So that's fixed is team hare, fixed is team tortoise. So with cardinal, the race is a sprint. With fixed, it's a marathon. You're in it for the long haul. It is not, and you've got this accounting department, because everything is about, we're going to make sure that everything is managed. There's big project management, huge internal bureaucracy. So we're going to manage things. We've got a target amount of fuel that we need to maintain for this. And so anything bigger than that is a problem. Anything less than that is a problem. As long as we're maintaining that consistency, then we're good. And
have you ever heard of the concept of finite and infinite games?
No, but tell me.
It sounds very similar to what you're talking about right now, where the fixed tortoise, from what you've said so far, that sounds like an infinite game to me, where the point of it is to keep on perpetually playing the game. The point is to continue playing no matter what the cause. Well, the cardinal, the hare, to me that sounds like the finite games, where there's a set of rules, there's a set goal, where this is the goal I want to accomplish, and once you fire and you play that game, it's, do you win, do you lose? Like there is an end to that game, but you can keep on playing more and more games after that.
Yes.
To me, that's roughly what that sounds like. And it's interesting that I find it interesting that you're coming to some very similar conclusions, or coming to some very similar ideas to places I've seen. Like I've seen a lot of these similar ideas across business, across psychology, across philosophy, across almost every medium I've seen. People have landed in very similar places where they come up with very similar ideas, like this idea that you have of the hare and the tortoise, where the hare has I consider that the finite game, where that's a set goal. You do a bunch of preparing for it. You go in, you play hard, you try your best, and then you win or you lose. That's it.
Okay.
You can't go back and change that game.
But there's three. There's not just the tortoise and the hare. There's the tortoise, the hare, and the hummingbird. Because anytime you're so one of the underlying philosophical parts of the human game. I'll get back to how the human game is a philosophy. I discovered that. But the lie of duality. Anytime you are ever faced with only two options, it's a lie. There is always a third. So finite versus infinite, that's duality. You're either looking at something that is on a spectrum of itself, or there must be a third option somewhere that you're just not seeing. Basically, if there is infinite, there's no such thing as finite anyway, because infinity is pretty much the ball game. You can't divide it or subtract from it or add to it or multiply it. It's literally everything. So, but so we have, cardinal it's a sprint, fixed, it's a marathon, hummingbird, mutable, it's a scavenger hunt. It's not about just getting to the finish line. It's about accomplishing a whole list of tasks. And you can do those in any order. You complete this when you have checked everything off of the to-do list. So it's a much more flexible, adaptable approach, but it also has the challenge of just because you've checked an item off the list and you get a feeling of accomplishment doesn't mean you've actually made progress. Because every task is not created. So 3 different strategies, and you're hardwired to apply one of those strategies to every possible goal. And you may be on different teams for different goals in your life. It's all in your chart. And when you realize, oh, yeah, I'm taking a fixed approach to this, I need to adjust my strategy accordingly. I need to adjust my expectations, and here are the ways to overcome the fixed obstacles. Or mutable. Oh, yeah, I need to kind of balance out those easy, fun, oh yeah, I checked something off my list tasks with some actually making progress tasks, so that I'm not just running around in circles and feeling like I'm making progress. And understanding that, and I said, this is teeny tiny little bit of astrology, and oh my God, so practical. And from that, I started to build out this idea of I called it the human game because I could see a gameplay with the natal chart of how you can develop these different areas of your life, how you can use astrology to help you to achieve goals and explore your potential. And it's all mapped out in the chart. And that was getting very complicated.
I'm going to ask you to put a pin in that just for a second. I have one more question before we dive deep into the human game, because I have a lot of stuff I want to ask you about that. But one last question I want to get into before we talk about that. Why astrology? What got you into that?
I was always interested in it. I mean, everybody's interested in astrology to some degree. I mean, it's been a part of humanity for like 4,000 years. Despite whatever popular views people have about it, it's got staying power. It is a thing, and it was always interesting. It was something, and so in 1992, I was rear-ended on I-5 and bought a new Mac computer with the settlement, and there was some money left over from the settlement, and that was found money. It had to go to something fun. And so I purchased some astrology software that I'd seen advertised in the back of Macworld magazine, back when there was a Macworld magazine. Because I loved the look of it. And I said, hey, I've got these really cool calligraphy looking fonts, and I could start a business running these astrology chart reports on this gold parchment paper and sell these things, and they'd be really neat and interesting. So I started a business running computer astrology charts without knowing much at all about astrology.
Okay.
And I started studying it myself, and with trying to learn it from books, and that was not useful. And then in 1995, I actually started taking classes. There was an astrologer in San Diego that was offering sort of a comprehensive series of classes that were geared towards taking these certification exams with one of the astrology organizations. And I dove in with that, and just be and just again the promise of the inspiration, the wisdom, the deeper meaning that it could offer. It kept on promising these answers, and I wanted those answers. and it just it took me 30 years to find the right questions, because there was so much of assuming I knew what astrology was, and nobody's really properly defined it. I mean, I write about this in some unpublished stuff that I'm working on, but it's been the blind men and the elephant. We know astrology based on what it can do, but nobody has actually seen the whole elephant. Nobody has been able to define what it is and why it does the things that it does. And this has been a problem for astrologers, and this has been a problem for scientists who try to debunk astrology with some of the most unscientific arguments possible. Since I've opened this can of worms, I've seen the elephant. Astrology is the science that considers how the cycles of the planets measure time.
Elaborate on that.
Everything about astrology is everything about how we understand time, and we do not understand time. We human beings have just a completely limited, miserably limited understanding of time. We can't engage with time directly. We can only understand time when it's measured. You can perceive the entirety of a ruler. You can't perceive the entirety of an hour. So we can only understand time when it's measured, and we can only understand time when it's measured in terms of the calendar and the clock. And all time measurement is based on astrology. All of it. It's all based on the apparent orbit of the sun around the earth. The seasons are based on astrological events. The calendar is designed to track to the seasons. It took 1,600 years to get the calendar so that it did what it needed to do, which is to make sure that the solstices and the equinoxes actually always occur on about the same dates. So we could measure and anticipate. So all of this is based on astrology, which is the apparent how the planets seem to be moving viewed from Earth, not astronomy, not the actual heliocentric view of this. Everything in astrology. So we look at an astrology chart, and we think that that astrology chart is a two-dimensional representation of three dimensions. It's not. It's a two-dimensional representation of four dimensions.
I'm assuming you're counting time as the fourth.
Every single position, every single planet, every single astrological interpretation is based on a season of time. Astrology is statistics. It is statistical times. All astrology predictions are statistical time series forecasts. And scientists rightly object when an astrologer says, oh, well, this event was caused because Mars was square Uranus. That is utterly unsubstantiated. That is, every time an astrologer says that, somewhere a scientist's head explodes. But what the statement actually says is this event is statistically more likely to occur during the period of time defined by Mars square Uranus.
Mm-hmm.
That is a valid hypothesis. That's something that can be scientifically tested.
Mm-hmm.
And not that there's any reason to, but it could be. And by the way, if that turns out to not be objectively significant, it doesn't disprove astrology. It disproves that particular hypothesis.
All right, fair enough.
So astrology is all about measuring time and seasons of time. That's what it is. This really went down an unexpected.
Hey,
you were asking science questions. You were asking really intelligent science questions, so you get this part of it.
Hey, I love rabbit holes. Rabbit holes are great. But let's go ahead and put a pin in that and come back to the human game.
Okay.
One, I love that it's called a game. You mentioned it briefly, but I like that you're approaching this with the feel of a game, because people want to have fun with things. People don't want to go to a class. They don't want to think about what it was like going to college or going to high school and sitting down in a class with a professor in front of them where they go blah 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 blah. You're approaching this as more fun. So tell me about the human game. What is it? How'd you come up with it?
The human game, I just, it is what I called initially this whole idea of working with the astrology to help you to actually, develop the city of your life, achieve your goals. I said, this is, and then I realized, I was struggling with what it was.
Mm-hmm.
For a year or so, I had this and I was talking about it, but I couldn't define what it was. It's a coaching model, kind of. You can use it for coaching, and you can, but it, is it a floor wax? Is it a dessert topping? I couldn't quite figure out what it was, and I was very frustrated by that. And then I realized it's a philosophy. And then I realized I'm a philosopher. I've always been a philosopher. I've never been an astrologer. I've never cared about astrology. I've always been a philosopher. Mm-hmm. I don't care about astrology for astrology's sake. I care about astrology because it promises to give me answers to the ultimate questions of life, the universe, and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm using astrology as a tool to answer these bigger philosophical questions. And it's like, all of a sudden my life made sense. It's like, oh, this explains a lot. And so when I was able to define what this is, the human game is a philosophy based on the idea that the universe is made up of stories. And I came across that as a Facebook meme. And the origin of that is actually a 1968 poem by Muriel Rukeyser, I can never pronounce her name, called "The Speed of Darkness," where there's a line and it says, "The universe is made up of stories, not of atoms."
Mm-hmm.
I took that idea and ran with it because it knit together so many different. All the pieces of the puzzle had been there, just in my various interests, in some of my favorite authors that have explored this idea and explored the shape of story and narrative and just everything that I've ever done came in. It's like, oh, this. And so then I kind of, again, applying critical thinking to it. Okay, the universe is made up of stories. What does that mean? You need a framework to make this practical. How do stories work? Because if everything is story, we need to know what that is. We understand what makes up an atom. We understand atoms and molecules. Mm-hmm. How do stories work? And the most fundamental discovery of this is what I call the human game story matrix. So what you experience as reality, the story that you experience and perceive as reality, and reality, by the way, is entirely subjective.
Mm-hmm. Reality is
Um,
just the story you tell yourself based on what you perceive and your entire background.
it is a story.
Mm-hmm.
It is all words. It is all made up. It's just this is something that I've played with and explored for many, many years, but didn't have a framework to really make it practical. Because for years I would talk about, things are real because you tell yourself they are. If you look, the chair that you're sitting in, you think this is solid. It's like, yeah, no, it's a whole lot of there's not much mass there. It's a whole lot of empty space.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason you don't fall through that chair down to the floor, or through the floor, because the floor is also a whole lot of empty space, is you tell yourself it's solid. You create this story, and that creates your reality. And that's all you know, is the story you tell yourself, or your subjective reality. And that's always been a big, chewy philosophical challenge. So the reality that you experience is what I call the composite story. It's like the composite signal you see on a television or a monitor. It's made up of 3 channels. So if you have an image on the computer screen, there's a red channel, a green channel, and a blue channel. And if you're doing work in Photoshop, for example, to mess with an image, you can't make changes to the composite image. You're actually making changes to the component levels of the image. That's where you have the creative control, and you make adjustments to those levels, and then that changes the composite story. Or the composite image. So the composite story is comprised of 3 component story levels. There's the plot level story, there's the character level story, and there's the theme level story. If you want to be able to change your story, you can't change the composite story. You need to go in and make adjustments to those component stories. The plot level story, title of the plot level story is just the facts, ma'am. It is the external, observable sequence of events. It's what happened. It is everything that appears to be outside of you.
So it's history, essentially.
Well, history's still a story.
Fair.
So it's the external description of things. So it's basically what you think of as the composite story, because it's what you perceive. Your reality is divided into internal and external. All you really know is the internal reality. What lives inside you is your sense of identity, your sense of me, and how you feel. That's it. That's all you actually know. That's the only thing you have a direct experience of, who you think you are and how you feel. Literally everything else appears to exist in the outside world. And you believe that engaging with the outside world is going to create internal feelings, and all you care about is feeling good, or at least feeling better. And this is how, human beings have about 8 lines of source code. So everything external is the plot level story. You have almost no creative control over the plot level story. You did not create the external world. Try as you might, you can't control everything, and let's face it, most of the time you can't control anything. So the plot level story is just what happened. The character level story is how you experienced. Character level story is everything inside you. Plot level story is what happened. Character level story is what happened to me, and how do I feel about it. So we have external goals in the plot level story, and we think, oh, if I accomplish this external goal, I'll be happy. But happiness is a feeling. Happiness is part of the character level story. You've got a lot of creative control over the character level story. And then there's the theme level story. The theme level story, so the character level story is the only thing that actually can be personal.
Mm-hmm.
Plot level story is not personal. Character level story is where everything personal exists, but the whole character level story isn't necessarily personal. Theme level story is not personal because it is way bigger than you. Theme level story is universal, spiritual, archetypal. It is the great big epic story. It is where we connect to universal truth. It is where you find meaning and purpose. Title of the theme level story is the Da Vinci Code. Everything is symbolic. Nothing means what it appears to mean. It is all coded and hidden, and immensely powerful. And we love exploring the theme level story, but you can't take theme, you can't live there, and you can't take theme level ideas and apply them directly to the plot level. It just doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
I
I feel like
remember.
I have a mental grasp of your plot and character levels, where plot is the external world, and I guess, yeah, plot is external. Not
Right,
much you can do about that.
right,
Character is internal, how I react to the external world or
yep.
my thoughts and emotions. However, where I disconnect is the theme level, where in my mind, most of the time that would connect directly to the internal.
Okay. Well, it has to connect to the internal, but it doesn't automatically. And so the theme level, for example, is where astrology lives. Astrology is entirely symbolic. Astrology is entirely made up, just like everything else, but it's really made up because it is totally symbolic and it means nothing. You can't apply it directly to your life. The sun is your authentic self and it's your core person. Okay, great. That's really interesting. That promises all of this meaning and insight, and you can't do anything with it because it doesn't connect directly to anything in the outside world. And and so there's a great story in the theme level. Astrology gives you, because the thing about the theme level, you've got absolute creative control at the theme level. It's a blank page. That is the scariest thing in the world. Ask any writer. Blank page is the most terrifying thing you will ever encounter.
Mm-hmm.
And what I love about astrology is that it means when you're dealing with your own story, with the story of your life, when you are looking for options, when you are looking for guidance in your story, astrology means you're never faced with a blank page on the theme level because you've got this multi-dimensional map of your story that contains all of the potential of your character, that contains clues and guidance to how to accomplish literally any goal. And you can pull little bits and pieces of that little, not the whole thing. You can't do the whole map, but for example, dipping down and going, oh, this obstacle, I'm taking a cardinal approach to this. I'm setting a target that's just way too big. I'm trying to make up for all of my past. This isn't enough just to accomplish this goal. I need to recoup everything I've already put into it. That's not realistic.
Mm-hmm.
I can take this little theme level strategy. I understand where it lives in me, and now I can apply it to the plot level thing and go, oh, let me adjust that goal. And so it becomes useful and meaningful because I realize there's a bigger picture to this. I can use that strategy. And it gives you a way of tapping into this deeper meaning, but it's optional. And it is raw story. And so you got to be really careful messing with that until you understand how story works. You need
Okay.
to be able to get a level of creative control over your own story, um, especially with astrology, because one of the challenges with story is when you encounter a prophecy, because um, every prophecy is going to be fulfilled. It's just once you encounter a prophecy, so the only law of the human game is the best story wins. So, and a good story doesn't have to be fun for you. Doesn't have to be fun for the protagonist. It's just a good story. Mm-hmm. And once something goes in your story, you can't take it out. It's there. You're stuck with it. You can only make choices based on that.
Why does the best story win?
Wow. Why? That's my observation, my understanding. That's the one reliable law that makes sense of everything for me. And I've leveraged, because when you understand the levels of story, the components of story, when you can set something up so that the story is better, it's got a bigger resolution, it has deeper meaning, the more it incorporates, then reality will bend towards that outcome. It's just I won't go into this to this, but I experienced that early on, sort of figuring out how story worked as it was going, dealing with a big story in my life where I'd gone from having a car accident that meant I wasn't going to have a car and wasn't going to be able to pick up Thanksgiving dinner in 3 weeks, and it was a whole big thing. And then I decided I'm changing this story and I'm navigating this and I'm exploring all of this stuff with the human game. And it wasn't, up until the very end, it wasn't going to be possible for my new car, which was a big thing, that I was going to get a better upgraded car on this, but it wasn't going to happen before Thanksgiving. Mm-hmm. And then I resolved the bigger, deeper stuff on the character level. I resolved some old theme level stuff for myself. I did so much work, got so much meaning out of this, that there wasn't any reason for it not to work out. And basically at the last minute, it was like, oh, wait a minute, you mean I can get the car like today, the Tuesday before thing? And even that, it was a roller coaster up until it was 8 hours, and up until I had the keys in my hot little hand and was driving off the lot, I wasn't sure I was actually going to be able to drive home in the car. But just, that's when I realized, I had texted my friend, the best story won, because this was the best possible outcome. Yeah, it was a good story that I'd learned all of this stuff and had this amazing personal transformation. But what would have made it a better story was that I also actually miraculously, that the timing all of a sudden worked out, and I actually could achieve my original goal of picking up Thanksgiving dinner and having this great story to tell my friends at Thanksgiving. And because there was no reason for that not to happen anymore, because I'd accomplished all of the internal things, I'd learned all of the character level lessons that were available to me, then just this thing that wasn't possible on the plot level all of a sudden became, oh yeah, this is happening. And it was just the wildest ride. But in that moment, I'm like, oh yeah, the best story won. That's the only thing the universe cares about. That is how you bend the laws of probability. That is how you can distort your reality. It is how you can create miracles, because basically your reality is virtual. Everything about this, but it has to have an internal consistency. And the final arbitration of that isn't logic or reason. The final arbitration is, is it a better story? You can change your reality as long as you are making it a better story. And a better story doesn't necessarily mean it's more fun for you as the protagonist experiencing that. A better story has more meaning. A better story makes better use of the rules of story. So you're dealing with more of the rule of three, or you're bringing in more character level depth. You're bringing in more meaning from the theme level. You're making it about something bigger than it appears to be about. Any of these things makes this, and we know when a story is better. Mm-hmm. Human beings, we speak the language of story. We have this, we know when a story is good, and we know when a story is getting better. And that's just, I don't have a better answer as to the why, except because that really just seems to be the universal law in this philosophy.
Hey, fair enough.
Everything else is optional, but that's the guiding principle.
Hey, sometimes just because is the best way to explain something.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I have to go with because, but I'm going to think, but no one has asked me that question before, so I'm going to continue to think on it. That's having a better explanation for why the best story wins is useful.
Well, wonderful. I'm glad I could contribute a new thought-provoking question.
Indeed. Thank you.
So go on, tell me a bit more about this human game of yours. Yeah.
So I've built out the philosophy of it. And simultaneously, I was trying to figure out, okay, how can, because I'm living this, I've been playing this in my own life for 3 years now. I have never had more fun in my entire life. And I would talk about this to people and share these ideas with people, and I would get polite nods as they kind of gradually back away, because they could see that I'm having a pretty amazing experience, but they couldn't
see why.
I could see why or understand it. And so I spent years figuring out, and then realizing, of course, it's all about, everything is story. I need a better story about story. I need to tell a better story about the human game. I need a story to help people to understand how they can step into story to be able to deal with the story of their life. And so many things that I've been teaching for decades. One of the things I realized, I've been teaching consciousness and spirituality and spiritual growth. And I've been teaching, these are great big theme level, juicy, amazing, incredible, meaningful theme level ideas. And I've been teaching them from the theme level. And so, you put on the diving suit and you do a little scuba with it and experience it, and then you can't really apply it anywhere else. It's an amazing,
cool in theory, not as useful in practice.
And I was always trying to find a way, because I had found ways of making these things practical for me. I had my own bridge, but I didn't have a story to explain what that was or how I had managed to develop it over however many years.
You had the bridge, but you didn't have the blueprints anymore.
Exactly. And I couldn't help. And how do I help other people to build this bridge? And one of the big revelations that I had was that people don't start. I need to start telling these stories. I need to revise how I'm telling these stories and change the perspective and tell them from the perspective of where everybody is right now, which is basically act one of the plot level story. Mm-hmm. Everybody thinks that happiness is getting what you want. And you still want everything you've ever wanted. And yes, getting what you want doesn't make you happy.
What is happiness then?
Well, let me put a pin in that, because that's a really good question, and I'll work up to that, because
Okay,
we
fair.
need a context for it. Getting what you want doesn't make you happy. But getting what you want doesn't prevent you from being happy. Getting what you want is fun. You know, it's great to get everything you've ever wanted. And you still want everything you've ever wanted. And part of the misconception of this theme level idea that, oh, getting what you want doesn't make you happy, is thinking that, oh, well, I can either get what I want or be happy. No. So I'm like, well, let me reframe all of this story. Let me put together a program with the human game where my invitation is, hey, I'm going to help you to get everything you ever wanted, and I'm going to help you to be happy. They're two separate things, but I'm going to show you how to accomplish that together. But you're going to think that you're just focusing on getting what you want, and that's fine, because that's where most of you is. We need that part of you on board with these strategies. Mm-hmm. And then you start to discover what it actually means to be happy. So getting what you want is focusing on the plot level story, the external goal. We talked about happiness doesn't live there. Happiness is a feeling. Happiness is part of the character level story. So part of the challenge is that I need to take you by the hand, help you to kind of understand, oh, here's the difference between the plot level story and the character level story. Here's how I can start to make that separation in my own stories. Happiness. So I'm going to skip a big chunk of this story, because, you know, to really have this make sense, mm-hmm. the whole story needs to be there.
Fair enough.
But the definition of happiness is the feeling you experience when you're free from want and free from need. This is really important to appreciate. Happiness isn't what we think it is. Happiness does not feel good. Happiness just means you no longer feel bad. Happiness feels great by contrast, because most of the time we're driven by wants, we're driven by needs. We are not happy. And so happiness feels a hell of a lot better than we feel by. But when you get to happy, it's just, oh, I've got options. You don't have to do anything. So you get to, so I talk about building a foundation of happiness, because really, happily ever after is not the end of the story. Happily ever after is the end of a goal. It's the end of a quest for happiness. But happily ever after, I mean, it's right there. Happily ever after means your life, your story goes on ever after, and you just no longer have to worry about happiness.
Interesting. I never thought about it that way before.
Nobody does, because we think happiness, but here's the thing. You talked about the infinite game. We don't want the story to end. We don't want life to be, we like having goals. We like exploring. We like growing. We love the game. We love the story. And so if you think happily ever after is the end of the story, so when I finally reach happiness, then that's the end of my story. I'm not ready for the story to be over. So I'm going to keep pursuing happiness, but I'm never going to quite get it, because I think that's the only way to keep the story going. And so that's a bit of faulty programming that many people have. And it's like, no. Happily ever after is where things start. Let's get happiness dealt with, because there's so much beyond happiness. There are genuinely good feelings beyond happiness that are so much easier to, happiness comes first, then you can get prosperity. then you can experience joy. Then you can really find the meaning and purpose of your life. But you got to build all that on a foundation of happiness. Let's solve the happiness problem first. Mm-hmm. And that's a big thing for most people, but it's doable. It's not a big quest. You need a good story. You need a story framework to understand how this practically works. You need a step-by-step. How can I, instead of just enjoying Kevin telling this story, how can I actually step into that and experience that for myself? How can I have what he's having? And the way that I've created, I originally had that, you had to do that with one-on-one coaching because that was the only thing that I had. But now I've created the human game experience, which is an astrology-based reality role-playing game that can give you creative control over the story of your life. So it's an 8-week program. It combines video tutorials and a player's handbook, and starting with the revision in April, it's going to have actual ways of understanding how you're leveling up your character. But it takes you step by step through this, so you're not just getting information and education, you're also having the experience. So you're applying these ideas sequentially to your own life. So the very first thing you do is you learn to spot the plot in your own. So you learn to take some of, an example of your own story. You take a composite story, and it's like, okay, great. Here's the composite story. Now you're going to break just the plot, all 3 acts of the plot. You've got like 6 sentences to do that in, and you're going to separate out just the plot from that story. And you will be amazed at how boring and unsatisfying the plot level story is, because it's just the sequence of events. Mm-hmm. It doesn't mean, so all of the stuff that matters to you, all of the stuff that is important, all of the stuff that makes the story good, that's the character level story. And that's important because you want to learn how to isolate the plot level story, pull everything meaningful out of the plot level story, because you don't have any creative control over the plot level story. Put everything that matters in the character level story, and then you can start to do something about it. And so the next thing you learn is how to start questioning the character level story, how to start lowering the stakes of the character level story so you can find the fun. Because games are only fun if you're not going to really lose anything. If the stakes are too high, if you think, well, if I don't achieve this goal, then I'm never, ever, ever going to be happy, it's not fun.
That's interesting, because so I'm an author. I've talked to a bunch of other authors. I've studied a lot about writing, and that's almost the exact opposite of what I hear of what makes a good story, where the basic fundamentals of story, from what I've learned, is that every story is intention meets obstacle multiplied by stakes, or perceived stakes.
Okay.
That's why I like to phrase it as, where we think, like, when someone is telling a story, if we can, like, even if it's the lowest stakes in the world, such as someone cuts in front of them in line at the supermarket, if you can somehow make the stakes seem perceived to be much higher, people are so much more invested in the story, or much more interested in diving into it. Like, the intention that this person might have is, well, I want to slight this person now that they've cut in front of me at the grocery store, out of the sense of principle.
Yeah,
it's interesting how.
Well, so here's the thing, because that is absolutely accurate, and that does, higher stakes does make for a better story.
No, I'll say perceived higher stakes. They don't have to be
but
higher.
Everything is perceived. But here's the thing. A good story only needs to be entertaining for the audience. It doesn't need to be fun for the protagonist.
Mm-hmm.
You're the protagonist. And if the stakes are unreasonably high at all times, you're not having any fun. Maybe a great story when you're looking at it from the audience perspective, but it really doesn't make it fun for you as the character. So lowering the stakes gives you more options, gives you the ability to go, well, I'm going to be happy. This is not going to mess with my happiness. So this is, so difference between an obstacle and a problem. Mm-hmm. An obstacle is anything that interferes with your ability to achieve an external plot level goal. So every story has an obstacle. The plot level stories, every story is divided into 3 acts. Act 1 of the plot level story is the goal. Act 2 of the plot level story is the obstacle. And Act 3 is the resolution. There is always an obstacle. There's no story without an obstacle. A problem is anything that interferes with your happiness. Happiness is a character level feeling. An obstacle that interferes with your ability to achieve a goal doesn't necessarily need to be a problem that interferes with your happiness. It's only a problem if you think not achieving that goal is going to affect your happiness in any way. And if you lower the stakes so that achieving the goal, great, I get deposits in my safety need account, my validation need account. It increases my happiness. Wonderful. I win if I win. If I don't achieve the goal, oh, well, it doesn't cost me anything. I can't lose because if I don't achieve this goal, it is not going to prevent me in any way, shape, or form from being happy. And so the obstacle just becomes an obstacle. It's not a problem. When you lower the stakes, you get all sorts of other options for how you're going to engage with the obstacle. Mm-hmm. And you can get really creative, which can make it a much better story, which can give you totally different outcomes. Because when the stakes are high, somebody cuts in front of you in line, you feel slighted, you feel attacked, you feel unsafe. It's messing with your happiness. It's a great big problem. You've got a very particular limited set of options as to how you can respond to that. Mm-hmm. But if you stop and lower the stakes, then you've got all sorts of other options that become available. First of all, it doesn't have to be even an obstacle. It doesn't have to be a thing. If you want to engage with that person, you can do it you could choose to play validation. This is advanced. You could choose to play validation games with that person. There are ways that you can go, okay, well, let's, something's going on with them. Let me see what I can do to actually make them feel a little bit better. At the very least, let me do whatever I can do to make them not feel like they were wrong for doing this, because that's going to alleviate a lot of. So there are things that you can do that makes it a better story, because there's a better outcome, because you got the opportunity to do something unexpected and creative and empowering, but only if the stakes are low. Not if you're in this, I'm threatened, I need to respond, somebody's wrong, and that's a good story. It's not an enjoyable story for you to experience. These are not pleasant feelings the pain that you're in, the fear that you're wrong, the guilt, all the stuff that comes up around that raises the stakes. Good story, not much fun. But you've got some creative control over that. And when you develop the skills, this isn't an automatic thing. There's some practice playing with this, but you can decide, I'm going to turn this around. First of all, this is not a problem for me. And even that is a big accomplishment, just in terms of a character arc. Ooh, look what I've mastered. This used to be a problem. It's not a problem anymore. That's a better story. My character has mastered something. So, hey, but then also, hey, what could I do with this? How can I contribute? How can I make this person's day a little bit better? And even if I can't succeed in doing that, the fact that I'm throwing some random validation their way is going to make me feel better, because expressing love and appreciation feels good. And as long as I'm not triggered, that's an option. That's not an option if you're not feeling safe. But if you're feeling safe, and then you have the ability to play validation games, if you choose to do that, takes the story in a whole other direction. It's lower stakes, but it's still a better story. So raising the stakes isn't the only way to engage the audience. And if the stakes are artificially high, it's not a good story. I talk about the countdown clock, as because there's always, every goal, we've got an unconscious countdown clock. It's one of the things that raises the stakes. That's what the countdown clock is supposed to do. But sometimes you need to ask yourself, okay, what happens when the clock gets down to zero? Is this really a major disaster, or does it just go beep? I'm focusing, I'm looking at this, is it appropriate to have the ultra dramatic digital countdown clock counting down the seconds, focusing on the seconds? Well, okay, that's appropriate if I've only got seconds left, but if I've actually got like a couple of hours or a couple of days to complete this, focusing on the seconds just raises the stakes way too high, inappropriately high stakes for this particular scenario. That's fair. Having the ability to recognize that in your own life, to exercise just that little bit of creative control, and it makes a huge difference.
Appropriate stakes for appropriate times in life. Sometimes you need big stakes to make big action.
Definitely.
But most of the time, you probably don't need big stakes to accomplish what you want to do.
Well, and even when we make the stakes big, there is frequently a whole lot of unconscious, unrelated, inappropriate, ghost story related stakes that are adding to it that really don't belong, that are raising the stakes higher than you think, and being able to separate those out. So yes, this is really important to me personally. This particular project, this particular thing I'm working on, it means a lot. I care about it. The stakes are high. That's fine. I don't also need the burden of thinking, maybe this will prove that I'm good enough for my daddy to love me. Because unconsciously that gets hooked into a lot of stuff. When we're raising the stakes, that's one of the ways that will reliably raise the stakes. And being able to, take your story up into the writer's room and go, okay, what are the actual stakes here? And are there programs and algorithms and expectations that I'm adding on to this that maybe don't belong? Am I trying to make this prove, something to my family, or fix the past, or whatever? Maybe that's not necessary here.
I'm reminded of an interesting exercise from Tim Ferriss in his book, The 4-Hour Workweek, where when you look at doing something or trying to do something, make a list of the best possible outcome of what's the best thing that could happen from doing this, and then make a list of the worst possible thing. And then looking at that list of the worst possible things, really dig into that and see, is this reversible? Because oftentimes when we look at those worst case scenarios of we inflate the stakes so high, we look at those actual worst situations and we realize, wait a second, even in the worst situation, I can still get back to where I am now, but with more experience.
Exactly. It's I in the lower stakes process, I call that evaluating the cost of failure. What do you think the cost of failure is? What's the actual cost of failure? Are you with much of the time when we're looking at the cost of failure, we're unconsciously thinking there's a slippery slope. If I don't do this, then it's going to mean that all of these other dominoes fall and it ends up in, it's like, is that likely? It's like, no. If I fail at this, then I've failed at this. And what is the actual reasonable worst possible outcome? I mean, is this the only chance I will ever have to do this? But we have to really look at that, because so much of this is unconscious, and so much of it is the stakes have gotten raised, and so much of this is we think it's about something more than it is. And just objectively looking at it, like, is this really, what is realistically the worst case scenario with this?
And even in those realistic worst case scenarios, it's often not even going to be as bad as you think it is.
Oh, it rarely is. And that's the point. When you can narrow it down to go, I'm just looking at this. I'm not anticipating what I think the consequences would be of boom, this. End of this particular goal. If I fail to achieve this goal, oh well, what? So what? The world stops turning? Am I really responsible? How much responsibility do I have here? Am I in charge of the actual Titanic, or am I in charge of the deck chairs? Because the deck chairs are important, and it's nice to have the deck chairs dealt with, but in the bigger scheme of things, whether or not I accomplish the optimal arrangement of the deck chairs, it's not gonna have a big impact on the rest of my story. It's a smaller thing, and being able to put it in that perspective. But what helps with this is recognizing it's a story. What helps at this is looking at the structure of the story, understanding, let's separate out the plot level, let's separate out the character level. What do I think? Where are the stakes on this? And you start to get the perspective on it. And as the stakes are lowered, then it's like, oh, well, now I've got some different options. Or, oh, maybe, these standards that also the standards of success. What are your actual standards of success for this goal? What has to happen for you to feel like this is a complete win? And are those reasonable? Is it possible? Is it likely? What's the good enough standard? Really, what is good enough? And then, is good enough good enough? I mean, by definition, good enough is good enough, but then you got to look at why good enough isn't good enough. What do you think you're going to get for exceeding the good enough? Because all of these things make the goal, they raise the stakes, they make the goal more challenging. You're putting so much focus on this external goal, creating these internal character level feelings. And then when you realize, oh, this train doesn't go there. This isn't the best way to accomplish. This is a whole other thing that I care about, that I'm just sort of, backpacking onto. This isn't going to happen with this. I need a separate, I go do something else to get these needs met. This is not the way that's going to happen. And when you can start to see the structure of this, when you start to see, what's the strategy that I'm applying to this? And it just, and it's so, there's an ease to this. There's an objectivity to this, because as you're lowering the stakes and you're looking at this, you're also sort of being protected from, oh, I did something wrong. It's like, no. It's like, let's look at this. Let's treat this like a puzzle. Let's recognize what this is. What's my best option here? What can I do? How can I, if I don't like the options that I'm seeing, how can I change the conditions so I've got better options? There are ways that you can approach things to get a better outcome. And even if you don't get the resolution to the goal that you would like, you can still win. You can still be happy. You can still claim a gift from this. It may not be an external plot level thing, but it's like you can learn. You can say, oh, well, I learned something really important from this. This gave me a really important piece of information, a really important piece of data going, yeah, that strategy that I've been applying to all of these other things, I don't think that's such a good strategy. This is something I'm finally realizing that just, yet again, that didn't quite work out. Let me take a deeper look at that. And that's incredibly useful. That's a gift that you can claim. And then you change your strategy, and then you've got a whole other set of objectives. Mm-hmm. It's just, but, and so, so little of the content of the various stories that I've put together is new. But what is new, what makes it so different, is the framework, is the story framework, is the bigger philosophy, is being able to go, everything is story. Here's what that means. Here's how you navigate with story. You can compare any two things. It's all story. Understand what you're looking at. Be able to define, find those levels of abstraction. Be able to look at where you can actually exert some creative control. Where is the critical point that I can make a little adjustment and get a great big improvement? Because it's always there, but you need to be able to step back and understand and look at the blueprint and analyze this and go, what's the story structure of this? What's this really about? What do I want to make this about? Do I want to make this story itself a big deal, or do I want to make this particular thing one act of a bigger story? That this is, okay, I'm having this one challenge here. It's like, okay, well, I'm not gonna accomplish this particular goal on this attempt. So, oh yeah, if at first you don't succeed, try again. So that means I need to try it again. I'm gonna fail again because rule of three. So I need to do this one more time. It's not going to work the next time either, but I'm going to then be able to figure out what the adjustment is that I need to make so that I can resolve this now on the third try. Mm-hmm. And I can go, okay, here's what I learned. Here's what I understand from these first two things. And now I make the adjustment, and then I can succeed on the third try, because that's how stories work.
What does it look like to win the human game? What does winning look like?
Having fun, feeling good. Winning is the good feeling. Winning is, in any situation, winning is literally just feeling better than you felt at the beginning of that round, because all we know is how we feel. So feeling better, raising your vibration, whatever framework you want to put it in. And it's always, no matter how good you feel, It's always possible to feel better. And so winning is feeling better. And there's the fun, and there's the joy, and there's the delight. And it doesn't, and it's separate from achieving the goal. Achieving the goal is lovely. You need to aim for the goal, but what I teach you in this is you prioritize the prize. We think, normally we think, okay, I got to achieve the goal. And then if I achieve the goal, then I can overcome the obstacle. And if I can overcome the obstacle, then I can fix the problem. And if I fix the problem, then I can claim the prize. You prioritize the prize. You aim for the goal, but you line all of these things up. And what matters is the prize. So yes, you can hit the bullseye where you achieve the goal and overcome the obstacle and fix the problem and claim the prize. But you could fail to do almost all of that. You could fail to achieve the goal. You could fail to overcome the obstacle. You could fail to fix the problem, and you can still claim the prize. Because none of those other things, all of those other things are kind of bonuses. All you really care about is the prize. All you care about is feeling better. All you care about is maintaining that foundation of happiness and then building on that. And nothing else matters. You don't have to get what you want to be. There are times when you don't get what you want, and that makes you incredibly happy. You don't have to achieve the goal to claim the prize. And that is such a radical concept. And it is something that you must experience a number of times to really integrate it. Because until you've experienced it, it's like, no, there's the part of I have to get what I want to be happy. And there's a part of you that believes that. And until that part of you gets taken on this journey to realize, oh, no, you care about being happy. We're going to help you to be happy. And hey, we don't have to get what we want to be happy. Getting what we want is fun. You can still do that, but here's the best way of doing that. And by the way, even if we don't get it, we're still, and when that part of you finally experiences that, then it's on board for the whole thing.
I think you just touched on something very important, because there's another question that I was going to bring up, but you basically just covered it all right there, where there's a quote that we hear all too often in our lives, and something that we often tell ourselves or have done for so long. Mm-hmm. When X happens, or when I get X, when whatever this is, when X happens, I will be happy. Do you have any idea how many times we have said that? And as soon as we get that thing, we move the goalposts and we decide, oh, actually, this wasn't what I wanted. This now is what I want. And it's this endless cycle of us essentially delaying happiness, delaying accepting that. And it's what you mentioned earlier, where some people think happiness is the end. Therefore, they're going to delay that as much as possible because they don't want the story to end.
Yeah,
exactly. Kevin, it's been absolutely wonderful to talk to you today. If someone wants to get started with what you do, learn more, contact you, or connect with you, where should they go next?
They should go to playthehumangame.com, PLAYTHE humangame.com. And there you can watch some introductory videos about the happiness problem, and you can learn about the Human Game Experience, which is being relaunched the end of April with a whole bunch of exciting upgrades. They can sign up for a free Human Game Introduction class. That's basically my blog, I guess. It's about 12 videos right now, and I periodically create new ones, but they explore different aspects and ideas and concepts of the human game to kind of give you a taste of it. So that's the portal for all of the resources that are available right now. And there's also a free report that'll pop up that you can get that talks about specifically the astrology based reality role-playing game, kind of how how it's sort of a Dungeons and Dragons, tracks with kind of Dungeons and Dragons in terms of how astrology determines your attributes. And I explain a little bit of that in how the game itself kind of works in that.
All right. Well, that'll be perfect timing because this episode should be going up right about mid-April, mid to late April. So it should be right on track for that. Anyways, awesome. Kevin, once again, thanks for coming on today. It's been a pleasure speaking with you.
Likewise. Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, then please share with a friend you think would like it, or share it on social media. It would absolutely mean the world to me, and it helps the podcast grow so much. With all that said, thanks for listening. I greatly appreciate it, and I'll talk to you all later. Ciao.